I spoke here last year a little bit. The title is slightly misleading. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Boston printers were up to, and then I'm going to talk about the mechanics and physicality of printing for this revolution. So that's my shop's old location. It's a lovely little space that was up on the north end. You can see my English common press. I've got rolling presses in the back. Looks pretty typical of an 18th century shop. I just moved into this building last July, which is a much nicer spot, much bigger spot. And I love every minute of it. People from all over the world get to come in and now see what we're doing and what we're talking about. So it's a much more diverse group of people. It's just absolutely wonderful. I wasn't quite ready for 350,000 people last July. That's actually how many came into the building. But, you know, it's all good. So this is what the shop looks like now, although I just redid it. But as you can see, we've got the 18th century equipment in there and some modern things which are going away. It's actually really hard to get back to the 18th century when you're doing a trade with every tool. If you go to Colonial Williamsburg, obviously, they do, because they've got tradesmen all over their property that can make stuff for them. If I want a little sheep's foot tool made for me, buy them, it's $500. So I don't have quite the same advantages that they do, but we try. So when we talk about these printers in Boston, I know J.L. Bell just did a talk about some of the shenanigans and things that went on between the printers, but make no mistake about it, there's a couple of printers that were very, very pro-patriot, okay? And that stance is actually going to be good for business for them. But I love Isaiah Thomas's tagline here, right? Open to all parties, but influenced by none. Of course, that's crap, right? So he's making it up. I like to call Thomas's newspaper the National Enquirer of Patriot News. The number of newspapers varies at this time period. Between like 5 and 7, there's some 12 printers in Boston, or printing presses, I should say, at any given time. And that's a relatively high number given the size of the city compared to New York and Philadelphia. So we see, I listed the guys in red who were, let's say, pro-loyalists, if you will. Then we have the Chronicle, John Mean, I'm sure. Did anybody hear J.L. Bell's talk? Were you all here? Okay, so he probably talked about Mean a bit, who's really a decent guy in a bad, his timing was bad, right? Starts a big business. Fleet Neutral, we've got the Massachusetts Gazette and the Boston Weekly Gazette, Draper, these are pro-loyalists. And then we've got the Boston Gazette and Country Journal, Benjamin Edes and John Gill. That's who I named my shop after. There was a pamphlet done a little while ago, many years ago actually, Marianne Yodelis, I think is the name, called Who Paid the Piper? And it talks about how many imprints each one of these Boston printers made during that time period, or how many they're credited for, and who was really doing well and who wasn't. So it turns out that Edes and Gill are by far the most prolific number of imprints during that time period, and also probably from a financial standpoint, they're doing exceptionally well. So how do you equate that to modern times? If I get more clicks and more viewers, I make more money. How do you do that? You create stuff. You create crises and national emergencies, right? And so you get, so you wind up, so Boston Gazette, are they doing it for this reason? I don't know. They leave almost no notes behind. They don't tell us what they're up to. But you see the newspaper hamming it up, creating these political essays. I mean, when you listen to John Adams talk, or some of these guys, they're always talking about being in the printing office of Edes and Gill, creating paragraphs and occurrences, right, and working the political machine. I would say it's probably safe to say that every weekend, somebody like that is in the shop of Edes and Gill doing something. If you look at the sheer number of political essays coming out of that place, it's incredible. I mean, I actually just met a guy the other day, kind of a lay person, who was reading Bernard Bailyn's book on, what's the title, Bernard Bailyn? Pamphlets of the American Revolution. Bernard Bailyn had, Brandeis, a history professor, had picked 75 pamphlets that he thought were the most important, right? So out of how many? Like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So I met this guy the other day who was actually reading Bernard Bailyn's book. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. It's pretty far down the rabbit hole there. So everybody's merging and going in and out of business during this time period, but that gives you a snapshot of just how many groups are there. And no printing press, no revolution. Boy, that character, I had no idea. Sorry. I should have used a normal font. So when we look at kind of how this works, 1775, we've got 1765 Stamp Act, Towns and Acts. In the Stamp Act, we're questioning the judgment, right? What's going on? When we get to the Towns and Acts, we're questioning the ministers, right? What's going on there? And then in the Tea Act, we're looking at king and parliament. And finally, we're looking at the legitimacy of the government itself. So you're going to see just kind of a little bit of shift as we go. Now, at any given time, they're taking on all kinds of people here and in different things, but that's a generalization about how this movement progresses. And I love prints like this. Here we've got America on the ground, France and Spain, talking, and England looking up our skirts, right? So Britannia, as always, like this. So when we look at the progression and the target of the press, the Royal Legislative Acts first, local government we start taking on. Now, again, at any given time, we can go after individuals in the newspaper as well, as we see by what happens to Andrew Oliver, Thomas Hutchinson, and the Stamp Act crisis. So we're going to tar and feather people and go after them, but just as a general thing, as we go down, the paper starts taking on different things. And finally, it goes to the parliamentary administration and the king, because the king is the guy that you can't print against. It's illegal. If I call the king a name or go after him in newsprint, that is actually illegal. A lot of people ask questions about the freedom of the press, and the truth is, a free press is one of the bulwarks of the English Constitution after the Glorious Revolution. So it's really important that you don't mess with them. You see the British Army in Boston during a couple of occupations talking about going after the printers, but they don't. Only when martial law comes down on Boston after 1774 and the war breaks out, does John Gill of the Boston Gazette actually get arrested, right? He gets arrested, and the crime that he's charged with is printing treason and sedition for the previous 10 years. By the way, that's a capital offense, right? Luckily for John Gill, the British Army had bigger fish to fry and other things to do. They just wind up letting him go. But one of my favorite, there's Andrew Oliver hanging from Liberty Tree, right? Awesome. Boy, this really is working out well. So let's talk about the technology of how we're delivering these messages to the public. One of the first things I ever said in type, but I didn't bring an example with me, was a little deal that we're certain was done by Benjamin Edes and John Gill. And it was posted up all over the town of Boston in the middle of the night. Right? Stop, stop, stop. Tuesday morning, December 17th, 1765, the true-born sons of liberty are desired to meet under Liberty Tree this day at 12 o'clock to hear the public resignation of Andrew Oliver, Esquire, distributor of the stamps for the province of Massachusetts Bay. A resignation? Yes. It's printed, right? Unfortunately, it was a pretty rainy day that day, and I don't know if Oliver showed up or not, but he had already resigned, but now they want to haul him out in front of the public. But it gets printed the night before or 2 nights before by Edes Gill and then plastered up all over town. So how they do that is with the common press. That's a picture of my logo. I ripped it off. So the press was invented by Gutenberg in 1450. It's going to be the same exact technology until the year 1800. When you look at just the printing presses coming into the Americas, the first printing press on the continent of the Americas was in Mexico City in 1534. And then almost 100 years later, in 1639, the printing press shows up for the very first time in British North America at Harvard College, right? So it would have been the same equipment. There's no difference. And that's one of the things that I find very interesting about the press is there's almost no innovation on it, really, from about 1490 until the year 1800, when in 1800 some modification happens to how you make cast iron, and now you can make machines out of it. I haven't been able to figure out what that is, but just something happens. Pardon me. That walk wore me out over here. So what's it look like? These are a couple fellows that stopped by my shop one day to help out. And the truth is, these are a couple of reenactors, and it really activated the space. They actually just went to work on the press that day. But this is typical of what you're going to see, 2 men working a press. We've got the common press behind us here. He's got an ink ball that he's actually beating ink on with, which I brought one. What else did I bring? This. So for all its loveliness, this high-tech tool is going to be in use for 400 years, right? Gutenberg, it comes along with Gutenberg's press, we think, but it's going to be in use until 1840. Somebody finally invents a composite material to make an ink roller out of, a brayer. Not until then do you have any other method of inking. So if you see any books that are printed, any pamphlets, any broadside, anything before 1840, this is what inked them, and they're printed on a machine like that. The next thing we look at are the letters, what he's beating ink onto. You can almost see the outline of a frame there. That turns out to be, it's almost like a picture frame with no bottom on it, but it's got a bunch of letters that had been set in type and then crunched in there. So how do we set type? I did bring a composing stick. When was it that Washington came and we did a parade for George Washington? Anybody know? 1787?
In Boston, 89.
89. Okay, thank you. So in 1789, when George Washington comes to town, the town had organized itself by trades for the parade for George Washington. And when I read this, I just, it's one of these things that I just love to hear about, but the printers marched with their composing sticks. This is a tool that defines their trade, right? And so it's an adjustable tray, essentially. Forever, you set it to the width of your column, right? And you're going to stand at some cases, and what do I do with the clicker? And you're going to start setting type. So there's just some more pictures of these guys pulling the bar on the press, right? Two pressmen normally run a press like this. One beats the ink on. The other handles the paper and pulls the bar. That gives you some efficiency with a machine that is inherently highly inefficient, right? And then you see us pulling off a print. That young lady there is actually a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. So, when we naturally let her print on the press, Declaration of Independence. So there's a type case, and I've got a composing stick in my hand. You'll notice there's little boxes. A lot of people have these things hanging on their walls for curious cabinets and so forth, but they're called type cases. The upper case with the little square boxes has my capital letters and accent characters. The box below it has my lowercase letters, and hence the term uppercase and lowercase. That's actually where the term comes from, because get it? Everybody knew that already. So, so you pluck the letters out one at a time, and you place them upside down in reverse. You do this by memorizing the case. So here's a close-up shot of somebody setting type. You see a couple times, she's setting small type. That's probably 10-point or 8-point. But you see a few letters upside down in the base of that, and she's holding them with her thumb and grabbing another sort, right? Now, somebody's cheating on their type cases. See, they wrote the letter in there. That actually makes it harder to learn. The idea is you memorize that case. You memorize which letter is in which box. And when you reach your hand into that box, you're not looking to see what letter it is. Every piece of type, it's not shown here. I have some examples with me, have a little nick on them on the front. It's a little mouse bite. You feel for that mouse bite, and that tells you that's the front and bottom of the character. So it allows you to orient it without thinking upside down and in reverse, right? So, and you think this is really, antiquated and something we didn't use for a very long period of time. This comes along again with Gutenberg, and we're going to use it. There's not an automated method to set type until 1903. So 450 years, this is the main tool of printers. Now imagine in 1900, you've got daily newspapers everywhere in the United States, right? How are they doing it? Labor. More people work in the printing industry in the year 1900 than any other industry, and it's all about typesetting. Finally, the linotype machine is invented, and all of a sudden now you type, and it squirts lead into a line of type. It's much more efficient for a newspaper. Puts a lot of people, typesetters out of work. Flailing my hands around. All right, let's try this again. How's that? All right, so that's what the letters look set. This is a little piece of the United States Constitution. It's my latest project, which I was kind of working on last year when I was here, but I actually finally finished it. This is 8-point type, and I can tell you my 8-point is your 6-point. We go by the body size. So like Alexander Hamilton's name's right in there somewhere. Where's New York? But you get the idea of the small pieces, right? There's it in a composing stick right there, type, and then I'm putting it in a galley and building the form. So something like this is a Boston edition of the Declaration of Independence that I print. There's about 9,000 characters. I include the spaces because it's something that we're going to set, right? This is a 7-hour typesetting job for somebody that knows what they're doing. This Constitution that I just did, 24,400 characters of 8-point type. It's under the title Federal Convention. This is a 1787 Boston printing of the United States Constitution before it's ratified. There's only one original document of this in existence. It's wildly exciting to me. I thought I'd reprint it. Apparently nobody's read it. So this is an example of the Boston Gazette newspaper. There's about 12,000 characters on each page. The Boston Gazette is it's a 8-page newspaper, generally, and it's 2 sheets this size, printed front and back, and folded over. Right? So to set 12,000, a good typesetter of the 18th century can set 12,000 characters a day. So I can tell you that's moving. I've never come anywhere close to that. The printers at Colonial Williamsburg actually can. They have the opportunity to set type. They get paid salaries and things like that. They don't have to sell what they make. So they actually have a bit of an easier job of it. But they're really good at it down there. They've had a program for about 60 years. So the printing press is the press of the document, right? And anything we need in a hurry, anything the Sons of Liberty want done. And even when the battle at Lexington and Concord breaks out, a couple days before April 19th, both Benjamin Edes and Isaiah Thomas are asked by the upper echelons of the Sons of Liberty to remove some presses from Boston because they might need them outside of town. By the way, they'd never packed up a printing press before, on the hint of the British Army marching into the countryside. What did they know that we don't know? Well, they knew there was going to be a battle, right? They knew that they were going to need these presses out. And that hit me one day. I'm like, I got a call from an author who was writing a book, and Isaiah Thomas is one of the characters. He's like, how did he get that press out of the 3rd floor of the Union Oyster House? I said, it breaks down, into a pile of lumber in 15 minutes. It's a lot harder to put back together, but it comes apart fast, and it weighs 1,100 pounds, right? Each case of type weighs about 70 or 80 pounds, and to print anything of any significance, you need about 40 or 50 of those cases. So they're packing a lot of weight out of Boston when they leave, and 2 of them do it. But it tells you, and I just moved to the town of Westboro a little while ago, and they have all kinds of wonderful documents from the committees of correspondence and safeties of Boston that were sent to the town instructing them to do things. Don't pay your taxes to the city of Boston. Just hold on to the money. We'll tell you what to do with it later. That's one of my favorite ones, right? We're just going to keep that tax money and things like that. So it's about supplies, but they're using these presses actively. Benjamin Eades set up his press in Watertown, and oddly enough, Paul Revere moves in with them. I shouldn't say oddly enough. They knew each other and they worked together sometimes. So Revere is actually going to get a contract to engrave and print money for the newly formed state of Massachusetts. Is that what I brought with me? No. Andy's engraving some of that right now. I just engraved some of the sword in hand shilling money. So this is actually Andy's forte, is that machine right there. It's called a copper plate rolling press. None of these presses were made by us. It is said that Benjamin Franklin constructed one of these rolling presses. He got some kind of job to do money for Delaware, Maryland, one of the colonies. So it's said that he actually built one, but he's one of the few people that are ingenious enough and industrious enough to take it on. So a rolling press has 2 rollers. You can see the ends of the rollers right there, a plank, and that plank is in between the rollers. You see that big star wheel with this guy going like that, right? Normally you wouldn't think it would take that much pressure, but there's no gears. This machine produces 10 times more pressure than the common press that we pull on. You cannot print a copper plate, which looks like this. Right? You cannot print a copper plate with the common press. It doesn't have enough pressure to push the ink down below the surface. How does this work? Well, first you have somebody like Andy who engraves. So he cuts the plate in copper after transferring the image onto the copper. And then to print it, you cover the entire plate black with ink. I almost brought some videos, but I figured I didn't have that much time to show somebody doing this, or me doing it. Anyway, so you You start removing the ink with a rag very carefully, right? And then you polish it by hand. You lay some felt blankets on top of it. Then, that's what you see over top there. Then you crank it through. It pushes those blankets and paper down into that plate, lifts the ink out, comes out on the other side. And what you wind up with is a black and white print. This is a reproduction that I had done several years ago of the landing of the troops. This is the Paul Revere version that was cut down. These original plates actually exist in the Massachusetts State Archives. In fact, about 10 years ago when I went over there to look at the plates, I think they get, anybody from the Mass Archives here? They get pretty excited when you go to look at their stuff. Because everybody goes there for genealogy, right? It's like, it's over there. But if you say you want to see their stuff, they get really excited. So it just so happened, the guy said, well, I hear about the plates. He goes, would you like to see them? Like, sure, yeah, of course. So there I was. He handed me a pair of white gloves. I'm holding Paul Revere's original Boston Massacre plate in my hands. Now, if I'm not supposed to do that, don't tell anybody. I was breathing Paul Revere molecules. I mean, my knees were shaking. It was wildly exciting to just hang on to an artifact like that. But it was super cool, really thick plate, very nice, and not executed extremely well. Revere wasn't a fantastic engraver, all right, but he's good enough. And what he's going to produce, these prints, by the way, were done by Andy. This is the Boston Massacre plate, the cut down edition of it. Why are they cut down and have no verbiage on them? When Paul Revere was living with Benjamin Edes at Watertown, he gets a contract from the newly formed state of Massachusetts to engrave and print money. Well, we don't have any money. So what do? Print it. And yeah, it was worth exactly that. Revere does that. So he flips these plates over. He flips over the landing of the troops, engraves a sword in hand shilling and 8 bills on it after cutting it down, and he engraves banknotes on the back of the Boston Massacre plate. He repurposes them, which I just love that idea. He could care less that sometime later in the future, if you find one of his prints, they're worth a couple $100,000, right? So, so there's the landing of the troops, and he would have had them colored. Christian Remick would have done it, right? So they're printed in black and white and then hand-colored. After you print one of these in black and white, you cannot print another. You have to re-ink the plate every time. So that's me inking a plate that's actually an 18th century plate that I acquired from a fella from London. So, I don't know, it's just an average book plate. There's nothing special about it, but the detail's pretty incredible. Somebody got mad at me, like, well, you shouldn't be printing on that 18th century artifact. I'm like, it's a book plate. It's not, that's why I bought it. Leave me alone. So there's me. What you're looking at right here are 2 rolling presses. You see one in the back. That is an original from Paris, France. It's built about 1750. Now, these things are as rare as hen's teeth. For years, when I was trying to get this project off the ground, I couldn't carry my common press around with me to show people what this project was like, so I was looking for an intaglio press. I didn't know how to do that either, but I figured I could learn, right? So I found a small, but what I was looking for was something like from the 18th century. Almost in 2005 or 2006, you couldn't even find a picture of a wooden rolling press on the internet. So and I found out later why. There's 10 of them in the world, right? 6 of them have had gears added onto them in the 19th century to make them easier to use. 4 of them have never had gears added onto them. That is one of the 4. So it's an incredibly rare press that I was able to get from a museum in Paris who had gone out of business via a friend in Edinburgh. It's the only one of its kind on the continent. Paul Revere had one, pretty much like it, all right? So I was then lucky enough to get a grant from the Massachusetts Society of Cincinnati, those descendants of George Washington's officers, to build a reproduction of that press, and that's what that is. Just after I finished that reproduction, I had the only 2 wooden rolling presses in the entire country. And it's a little bit like, yeah, I know, I had a big grin too. I'm like, because it's really fun to do something. It's even more fun to print on them. It is somewhat experiential archaeology. I don't know if that's a term, but you're doing something that hasn't been done in a couple hundred years, right? Here, anyways, in this country. I mean, if you go to the Rembrandt House in Amsterdam, they're printing on a reproduction press. In fact, they invited me over there to look at their press and talk to the guy who built it. So that was a pretty fun adventure also. But, it's new. And so it turns out when I first imported that old press and put it together, I had this friend from Edinburgh, he came over, and we were printing, this guy's a William Blake expert, so he brought some Blake plates. I didn't have any plates yet. And so we were printing Songs of Innocence plates, reproductions, on that old press. And we read the 17th century French manual, The Art of Engraving, how to set the thing up. So we set it all up. And you know what? The first print we pulled off of that was beautiful. That machine knew exactly what it was doing. It's been making prints for hundreds of years. It's not something you think about, but machines know, they get used to working with themselves and their parts, right? And so, unlike me, I seem to go worse as where I go. But so when I got this new press, had it built, it was like a stubborn teenager. I wouldn't make prints, it wasn't working right. It took about a year and a half to work those pieces and those bearings in and everything to get it working so that it actually works. The bearings are made out of tin. You put mutton grease on them because you have tin bearing with a wooden roller. And apparently mutton grease is the thing to use when you want to lubricate something like that. It doesn't go rancid either. So Revere is going to use these presses. He's going to do he can't draw. So somebody like Henry Pelham is going to draw this. Everybody probably knows that story. Pelham draws it, Revere rips him off. And it winds up, Pelham, we found in his letters in London, we don't know if the letter was ever sent or not, but maybe it was a copy of a letter, who knows. But it basically, he goes after Revere and says, I thought I lent my drawing of this to a person who had some kind of, moral values and characters. Apparently not. The world's gonna know what a ripoff you are. And he says, oh, by the way, my mother wants those pieces of the rolling press back that she lent to you. So the Pelhams had lent Revere some pieces for his press, and now they want them back. Well, his print is called The Fruits of Arbitrary Power. Didn't have all the bells and whistles that the Sons of Liberty wanted. We needed something a little bit more powerful, the Bloody Massacre, and that's what we get. So, but it's these machines that are going to produce that propaganda. The scene with the blood on the ground, right? By the way, Andy does the watercoloring on these too. It just doesn't have the same effect in black and white. Very, very important. This is me pulling a print off of that 18th century plate. And it's really, you go at this for about 15 minutes per print. Once you print one, you can't print another. You have to re-ink the plate every time. So it's quite a process. So if you're not into Eastern philosophy, but you want to learn how to meditate, try printmaking. I'm serious. You get in such a zone. It just requires just enough concentration that you can't daydream. So put your mind, you know how if you ever get in a thing where it's just timeless, you're there for 10 hours, but it feels like a moment. That's printmaking. It's just really fun to do. and cool, you come up with something like that. There's the Boston Massacre in black and white. That's the cut down plate that Revere cut down, but that's his strike off of his original plate. The other thing you're going to do with this is watercolor. It's a part of making the propaganda come alive. And so this is I got another grant from the Massachusetts Society of Cincinnati. I only have one address apparently to send those grant things to. This is a 1780s Reeves watercolor box set. It's just super cool. The label to me is worth what I paid for it. It's just an awesome label. But what we're trying to do is to demonstrate to go from using modern tools to show how we use 18th century tools to watercolor these things. And it's no small task to watercolor something like this. What is it, 15 or 20 minutes, Andy?
Barely. More like 30, 40 minutes sometimes.
A piece. So the Boston Gazette ordered 200 Boston Massacre prints from Paul Revere. They were all printed and colored. We don't find any black and white ones. Anybody know of any black and white prints? They colored them all. It's value add. You're going to sell them for more money than that. So you'll see in the next year, hopefully, we're going to be doing some watercolor demonstrations using 18th century reproduction brushes and tools and pigments. There's a gal, Andy, I had you at a modern table, so I didn't show your picture. I had a picture of him doing, but he had a modern table. So this is Jana Galvalente down. She's doing a watercolor there on an easel. You rarely see something like this. This is the Paul Revere's Boston Massacre plate printed in a 5-column broadside. So you're using two processes here. Not only are you running this through a rolling press and printing it, then you're going to do the letterpress printing. There's always a big argument which one comes first. I go back and forth with a rare bookseller, like, okay, who do you print the? My guess is you print the letters first, but I don't know. But again, this is something that they didn't color, but it came out in a broadside, very powerful. These are something, it's a very rare imprint from the Benjamin Edes and John Gill. When I get a phone call about somebody saying they have a historic document and they want to know if it's valuable, several times it's this. But there were 19th century reproductions done on modern wooden paper that's the acid's eating it up and they're falling apart. And there's some known typographical problems with the reproductions that I'm aware of. So you have to be the bearer of bad news. Yeah, sorry, it's in the 19th century. Still not worthless, though. It's a neat print. Oh, hey, what time is it? I thought I had a few more things to talk about. We have 5 more minutes, so I have some show and tell stuff up here, but I'd like to leave some time open for questions. If you have any questions about the process, about printing history, Edes and Gill, or anything else, yes.
What was the first newspaper in America? I've been told News from Virginia.
Nah, in America, no, it was Boston. The Journal of Occurrences.
Public Occurrences?
Public Occurrences, 1698, something like that, right?
1690.
Yeah, it was published for one day.
So is there
And then
just
put out
like
a business.
So semantics about like what's a newspaper and what isn't?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, and then the 1703 was the next Boston paper. Again, that's because
Yeah.
I don't think there's a press in Virginia in 1703.
Yeah, no.
So it's Boston, the first 2 or 3, and then James Franklin comes along. So he's probably the 3rd or 4th, yes.
How do they make ink?
How do they make ink? Well, ink, the primary ingredient of ink is linseed oil. Linseed oil comes from flaxseed. We don't know how to make linseed oil in the colonies. So we don't have the processes to make it. So we're going to import linseed oil. The other 2 ingredients are carbon black and pine resin. So you could buy barrels full of ink. In fact, in 1775, during the occupation of Boston, a printer had moved from Salem to Harvard College and was printing over there. Well, somebody rips off a barrel full of ink. Somebody ripped them off and took the ink. It was pretty valuable. So you can make it. We have plenty of carbon black and we have plenty of pine resin in the colonies. Somebody like Benjamin Franklin actually vertically integrated his business. So he had an ink making manufacturer, if you will, and he's selling the ink to his franchisees and other people. He's buying all the paper, the output of paper mills, and selling it to other people. There's a reason why he retires at 42.
And did the linseed oil come from Britain?
Yes. Yep. Other questions? Yeah?
So the 200 prints of the Boston Massacre of the Sons of Liberty, that's 50 hours worth of printing. This is not this is not the case that more hands would have gone faster.
You've got one plate.
Right.
So, well, maybe he did both the landing of the troops and the Boston Massacre. I don't know if they come out at the same time through advertisements. We know that the Boston Massacre is advertised, but he does it both in the same year. They're sister prints. So theoretically, you could print one, print the other, print one, print the other. And the other thing is, I just don't know how many of Paul Revere's apprentices would have known printmaking. It's tricky enough to learn. Did he have a workman that learned it, or was he himself doing it? I don't know. We just don't know. It says engraved, printed, and sold by Paul Revere. But yeah, it's no small task to produce a couple hundred of these for sale.
And I think he was able to crack out the massacre like in 2 weeks before Pelham was.
Yeah, 2 weeks. So Revere's busy. There's a great video, actually, if you want to see somebody cutting a plate. Andrew, what's his name down at RISD?
Rafferty?
Rafferty, yeah. If you Google Andrew Rafferty of RISD, you'll see him taking a 15th century image that had never been cut in a copper plate and going through the entire process of putting the wax on the plate. It's actually one of the most beautiful videos I think I've ever seen because of his just really high-end craftsmanship.
Evan Lindquist.
I don't know him.
He's done
Yeah.
George.
Don't get me wrong, I like watching Andy, but that 15th century thing was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I often hear of printed images called woodcuts. Was
Yes.
wood ever used for copper?
Yep, wood is used all the time. Let's see if I brought one. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I didn't, but an example of a woodcut might be something, see that letter there? What you're gonna see all the time, here's the difference. A woodcut is something you lock up with the type and print on the common press. So oftentimes you will see them as advertisements. You'll see a little ship or a little house, right? A little crude women. The American woodcuts are really funky, and they're just super cool. I wondered, well, how hard could it be? You know, I just saw a comet from 1754, right? Because it was Halley's Comet. So somebody made an incredibly crude woodcut of it. And I decided last winter to take a woodcutting class. So I got that comet image out and cut it in wood. And the truth is, my crude attempt at it wasn't as good as the crude attempt that I thought was really crude in the that appeared in a magazine. So American woodcuts, there's actually a book, I think it's called Ornaments and Woodcuts, 1630 to 1830 Boston or something like that. Somebody spent a lifetime acquiring every ornament that was printed in a newspaper and every image. Because you have a lot of religious imagery in woodcuts. You have a lot of woodcuts for almanacs, right? So you see them a lot of times, and you see them used again and again over the course of like 70 years. But they're just crude little woodcuts on plank wood, as opposed to a modern wood engraver who can do very fine work on the end grain.
So they would basically be cone pieces of movable type that would just be put in with the.
It's a piece of wood, however big it is, that they've cut and ensured that it's type high, exactly the same height. Well, it has to be exact. And you'll see it not printing so well sometimes. Printing on a press like this, we actually dampen the paper, so it's a moist process, which is why when you see something like the Boston Gazette newspaper, you have that letterhead up there, that's done in metal. Paul Revere actually cut that in printer's metal. He metaled down letters because they use it every week. He didn't want it to crack. The other speakers are not here, so I can still answer some more questions. Yeah.
How much longer is Gill and Edes in business after they moved to Watertown?
They're not. Well, I mean, John Gill dies in 1785. Benjamin Edes dies in 1803, and he's printing till he dies. But they break up their business. So Gill remains on Court Street. Edes winds up probably taking the press that he took to Watertown, moving it around several times, till somebody sees him in 1801 or 1802 in an apartment with his 50-year-old daughter running the press, and he's sitting there setting type. It didn't go well for him because he took so much of that money that they printed, so much Continental money and so much Massachusetts money, the money was worthless. But so he's forking out real money for supplies and not getting paid back really. So it kind of bankrupts him. He had a big family. Yeah. Oh.
What's your background before you became Edes Gill?
Corporate sales management, of course, for a Fortune 500 corporation. How else would you get into something like this? Yeah.
Edes and Gill, I've never heard of it before till I came here today. And what are the hours? What's the setup here?
Oh, my shop?
Yeah.
Oh, my shop is open from 10 to 6 right now. It's going to be open at 10 to 9 in the summertime. So I was going to invite you all. If anybody wants to come by today, I'm printing until 6 o'clock. I'm right at Faneuil Hall. So it's a really short walk. You can see me working the press over there. We're there every day. I personally am there on the weekends and maybe a couple days during the week. So yes, I would invite everybody to come over and remind me that you're here and you saw me talk, because it's kind of cool to watch happen. And then occasionally throughout the summer, we'll be doing printmaking and things like that. Thank you all so much for coming in, for listening to the talk. I really appreciate it. Oh, that was great. Back to work.